Imagine waking up after a century. Everything you knew is gone. Your family has turned to dust.
The city you walked through yesterday is now in ruins, but here's what's haunting. You didn't age a single day. Your body is exactly as it was when you closed your eyes. And when you look around, you see something impossible, a skeleton coming back to life. Flesh rebuilding on bone, a soul returning to a body that's been dead for 100 years. This is the real story of Hazrat Uzair, a man whose life became a miracle so powerful that it challenged
The very foundation of human understanding about death, time, and God's power. And what happened to him wasn't just strange. It was a message for all of us, even today. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and let us know in the comments which country you're watching from. If you're ready, let's begin.
This was the answer. This was the direct response to his question, how will Allah give life to this after its death? By showing him in the most graphic, most undeniable way possible, by making him witness resurrection itself.
By taking something that had been dead for 100 years and bringing it back to life in front of him. Not as a theory, not as a concept, but as a reality. And in that moment, everything changed for Uzair. Every doubt evaporated. Every question was answered.
His faith transformed from intellectual understanding to experiential knowledge. He didn't just believe that Allah could resurrect the dead. He had seen it.
He had lived it. He had been the subject of it. When Uzair finally spoke after witnessing this miracle,
his words carried the weight of absolute certainty. He said, I know that Allah is capable of all things. But these weren't just words now. These were words born from direct experience.
This wasn't faith based on logic or reasoning or what he had read in scripture. This was faith forged in the fires of the impossible.
But something even more profound happened to Uzair at that moment. It wasn't just that his doubt was removed. It was that his entire perspective on existence was transformed. He had lived in a time of despair, a time when the land was destroyed, when the people were scattered, when darkness covered everything. And in his moment of weakness, he had questioned whether that destruction could ever be reversed, whether that darkness could ever be lifted. And Allah had answered by showing him that nothing, absolutely nothing, is permanent in the eyes of Allah, except His will. Death is not permanent. Decay is not permanent. Destruction is not permanent. Time itself is not what it seems. 100 years can pass in what feels like a moment. A body can remain perfect while centuries transform everything around it. The dead can be brought back to life. Nothing is impossible for Allah. This realization would have shattered Uzair's previous understanding of his role and his mission. He had been a man carrying knowledge, trying to preserve the deen in a time of darkness, and he had been burdened by doubt about whether it was possible, whether the scattered people could ever be unified again, whether the destroyed land could ever be restored, whether the lost people could ever find their way back to Allah. But now he knew. He knew with absolute certainty because he had lived it. He had been dead, or in a state indistinguishable from death, and he had been raised. He had seen his own body perfectly preserved while time ravaged the world. He had witnessed the dead being brought back to life. The Quran then tells us something remarkable about what happened next. It says that Uzair's sight was turned to his food and drink, and they had not altered. And then he was told to eat and drink and be comforted. It's as if Allah was saying to him, you are confused about time and death and resurrection, so let me show you something simple first. Look at this food. It has not decayed. Your body has not aged. Time has not touched you the way it touches everything else. And now that you understand this, you can understand everything else. Scholars have debated what happened to Uzair after this awakening. Some say he went back to his people and told them about the miracle. Some say he helped restore the Torah, which had been lost during the destruction. The Quran mentions that among the people of the book, there were those who said things about Uzair that were incorrect, that they called him the son of Allah. This was a grave error, a misunderstanding of who Uzair was and what his miracle meant. Uzair was not divine. He was not the son of Allah. He was a servant of Allah who had been given an extraordinary experience, a servant who had been corrected in his moment of doubt and shown the absolute power and capability of Allah. A servant who had lived through death and resurrection to teach his people and to teach us about the nature of death and resurrection and divine power. The real transformation wasn't just in Uzair's body or in the world around him. It was in his understanding of reality itself. He had learned that what seems permanent is temporary. What seems impossible is possible. What seems destroyed can be restored. And most importantly, what seems like the end is never truly the end when Allah wills otherwise. For 100 years, Uzair had slept. For 100 years, his people had lived without him. And when he woke, everything had changed. The ruins had been rebuilt. The people had returned. Jerusalem was alive again. The very thing he had doubted, that Allah could restore what was destroyed, had literally happened while he slept. It was a mirror image, a perfect answer to his question delivered through his own experience. The story of Uzair doesn't end with his awakening. It echoes forward through time, reaching us here and now over 1,000 years later. And the message is more relevant today than perhaps ever before, because we live in a time of unprecedented doubt. We live in an age where death seems final, where time seems to move only in one direction, where the evidence of our own eyes tells us that things decay, that civilizations fall, that what is destroyed stays destroyed. And yet, the story of Uzair stands as an eternal testimony against all of this. It is Allah's way of telling us through the Quran that our perception of reality is limited. Our understanding of what is possible is constrained by our experience. And the power of Allah transcends every law we think we understand, every scientific principle we think is immutable, every certainty we think we possess about how the world works. Think about what we can learn from Uzair's moment of doubt. He was a learned man, a knowledgeable man, a believer. And yet, when he looked at the ruins around him, doubt crept in. This tells us something profound. Doubt is not a punishment for the ignorant. Doubt is a human experience that can touch anyone, even the most devoted servants of Allah. It doesn't make you a disbeliever. It doesn't make you less worthy. It makes you human. But here's the crucial part. What we do with that doubt matters. Uzair didn't act on his doubt. He didn't preach it to others. He didn't let it turn into disbelief or rebellion. It was a moment of human weakness, a question that rose in his heart when confronted with overwhelming despair. And Allah heard that question, and Allah responded, not with punishment, but with the most incredible mercy. A direct, undeniable answer. This is the pattern that runs through the Quran. When humans struggle with faith, when they question, when they doubt, Allah doesn't destroy them. Allah addresses their doubt. Allah gives them signs. Allah provides evidence. Allah engages with the human heart in its confusion and brings it back to certainty. Uzair's story is also a profound meditation on time and death. We are so focused on the passage of time, so obsessed with aging and mortality, so afraid of death. But the story of Uzair shows us that these are concepts that exist within our limited understanding. Time is not what it seems. Death is not what it seems. 100 years passed for Uzair in what felt like no time at all. His body didn't age. The boundaries we think are fixed, the boundaries between life and death, between now and then, are not as solid as we believe. And this connects directly to the resurrection, to the day of judgment, to the afterlife that is central to Islamic belief. If Allah can preserve a body perfectly for 100 years, If Allah can bring the dead back to life, if Allah can reshape a skeleton and cover it with flesh and return the soul to it, then what does that tell us about our resurrection? What does that tell us about the power we will witness on the day of judgment? The Quran mentions this explicitly. The story of Uzair is given as a sign, as evidence, as a teaching about the resurrection to come. The scholars say that when the people doubted resurrection, when they asked how the dead could possibly be brought back to life after their bodies had completely decayed, the Quran pointed to Uzair's story as an answer. Look, the Quran says, look at what happened to this man. Look at what happened to this donkey. This is how Allah does it. This is how resurrection works. But there's something even deeper here. The story of Uzair is about faith in action. It's about continuing to believe in the power of Allah, even when everything around you suggests that power is absent. It's about maintaining hope, even when despair seems justified. It's about trusting in Allah's plan, even when you don't understand it. Uzair lived in a time of destruction. He saw his nation fall apart. He witnessed the collapse of everything sacred. And in that darkness, he still served. He still preserved knowledge. He still carried the deen. He still believed even in his moment of doubt. And Allah honored that. Allah honored his struggle. Allah honored his faith by showing him something that would transform his understanding forever. In our own lives, in our own times of difficulty and confusion, this is the message. Allah is watching. Allah hears. Allah responds. Not always in ways we expect, not always in ways we can understand immediately, but Allah responds. Sometimes the answer comes through difficulty, sometimes the answer comes through a miracle, sometimes the answer comes through patience and trust, and simply continuing to believe even when we want to give up. The Quran ends the story of Uzair by describing him as among the righteous. Despite his moment of doubt, despite his question, despite his struggle with faith in the face of overwhelming despair, Uzair is remembered as righteous. He is remembered as one of those chosen servants whom Allah honored with knowledge and faith and incredible miracles. This is the final message. Your doubts don't disqualify you from Allah's grace. Your struggles with faith don't make you unworthy of Allah's mercy. Your moments of weakness don't erase your devotion. What matters is what you do after those moments, how you respond, whether you turn to Allah or away from Allah, whether you let doubt become disbelief, or whether you let it drive you closer to seeking the truth. Uzair's sleep lasted 100 years. But his message is eternal. It resonates across centuries, speaking to believers in every age, in every situation, in every moment of doubt and despair. It tells us that Allah is capable of all things. It shows us that death is not the end. It demonstrates that time itself bends to Allah's will. And it reminds us that sometimes the answer to our deepest questions comes not through words or logic, but through direct experience of Allah's power and mercy. When we face our own moments of questioning, when we look at the state of the world and wonder if things can ever be better, when we struggle with faith in the darkness, we have the story of Uzair. We have his example, we have his testimony, and we have the knowledge that the same Allah who preserved him, who raised him, who brought the dead back to life in front of his eyes, is the same Allah who watches over us. The same Allah who hears our questions, the same Allah who will answer our doubts if we remain steadfast, if we continue to believe, if we turn to him with our hearts open. This is the eternal power of Uzair's story, not just as a historical event, but as a living testimony to the nature of Allah, the nature of faith, and the boundless possibilities that exist when we trust completely in the power and mercy of the Most High. Don't forget to subscribe now so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. We sincerely request your du'as as we are going through some difficult times. Your prayers mean a lot to us and help us continue creating these videos. See you in the next video. May Allah be pleased with you all. Hazrat Uzair lived during one of the darkest periods in the history of Bani Israel. The land was broken, the people were scattered, and the city, once a place of believers and scholars, had become something unrecognizable. This was Jerusalem, and it lay in ruins after invasion and destruction. The Quran tells us that Uzair traveled through this desolate landscape, passing by abandoned houses, overturned walls, and empty streets where life once flourished. But Uzair was not just any man. He was a learned scholar, a keeper of knowledge, a man devoted to Allah and his deen. In an age when darkness had covered the land, when the people had strayed far from the path, Uzair stood as a pillar of faith. He was respected, he was trusted, and most importantly, he was a man who carried within him the weight of responsibility for his people's spiritual survival. The Quran describes him as having deep knowledge and dedication to the deen of Allah. He wasn't a king or a warrior. He was something perhaps more powerful in that moment. A man of wisdom, a guide for the confused, a light in the darkness. When he looked at Jerusalem, his heart broke. The mosque was destroyed, the sacred knowledge was scattered, the people were lost, wandering without direction, without hope. This is important to understand. Uzair didn't live in a time of comfort. He lived in a time of catastrophe. He witnessed the collapse of everything his people held sacred. And yet, despite this, despite seeing his nation fall apart, despite watching believers lose their way, Uzair remained steadfast. His faith didn't shake, his commitment didn't waver. One day, as he traveled through the ruins of Jerusalem, something profound happened within him. He looked at the destruction around him, and his heart moved him to make a statement that would change everything. A statement that would lead to the most extraordinary miracle in human history. He said something that, on the surface, might seem like a simple observation, but it was a question that revealed the deepest doubt hidden in his heart. He asked, "How will Allah give life to this after its death?" He was looking at the land, the ruins, the emptiness, and in that moment, doubt crept in. Not disbelief, but doubt. A moment of human weakness. The Quran captures this exact moment. It doesn't judge him harshly. It simply records what happened. Here was a learned man, a devoted believer, and yet in a moment of overwhelming despair at the state of his nation, he questioned how Allah could restore something so thoroughly destroyed. It was a moment of uncertainty about Allah's power, a moment where despite his knowledge, despite his faith, the weight of what he was seeing became too heavy. And Allah heard this. Allah saw this moment of doubt in the heart of his servant, and Allah decided that the answer to Uzair's question would not come through words. It would come through experience. It would come through a miracle so profound that it would silence every doubt, not just in Uzair's heart, but in the hearts of believers for generations to come. What happened next was unlike anything Uzair could have imagined. As he sat there in the ruins, contemplating the destruction, something overtook him. The Quran tells us that Allah caused him to die. But this wasn't a normal death. This was something different, something designed, something purposeful. Uzair fell asleep, but it wasn't an ordinary sleep. He closed his eyes and time stopped for him. 100 years passed in what felt like a single moment, while the world aged a century around him, while generations were born and died, while cities were rebuilt and civilizations transformed. Uzair remained in a state of complete stillness. His body didn't age, his consciousness didn't experience the passage of time. It was as if he had simply closed his eyes for a brief rest, only to open them in a completely different world. Think about what this means. While Uzair slept, everything changed. His family aged and died. His friends turned to dust. The ruins around him were slowly rebuilt. New people were born. Children grew old. Stories were told about the destruction and new stories were created about the rebuilding. Prophets came and went. Knowledge was preserved and lost and preserved again. And through it all, Uzair remained exactly as he was. The Quran uses a specific phrase to describe this state. It says Allah caused him to die for 100 years, then raised him up. The word used suggests a complete cessation of consciousness, a total removal from the flow of time. Yet his body remained intact, his flesh didn't decay, his bones didn't crumble. It was a preservation that defied every law of nature, every understanding of how death works. During this sleep, Uzair was not suffering. He was not aware of pain or loss or the passing of time. It was a mercy in a way, a suspension of existence. He didn't experience the century. He didn't feel loneliness or fear or despair. One moment he was in the ruins questioning Allah's power, and the next moment he would open his eyes to something impossible. But while Uzair slept, something else was happening, something that would prove to be the real answer to his question. In the ruins where he lay, in the very place where he had expressed doubt, a transformation was occurring. The land was being rebuilt. Jerusalem was rising again from the ashes. The people were returning. Life was springing forth from death all around him. This is the profound symbolism that many miss. Uzair's sleep wasn't random. It wasn't punishment alone, though it contained an element of correction. It was an answer. It was Allah showing him, in the most direct way possible, exactly what he had questioned. How does Allah give life to the land after its death? By first showing him his own body being preserved perfectly, then allowing him to witness the resurrection of the land itself, by making him, literally, someone who would come back to life after death, just as the land had. The century passed. Uzair remained untouched by time, unaware of the world's transformation. And then, after 100 years, something incredible was about to happen. Then came the moment. The Quran says, "Then he raised him up." Uzair's eyes opened, his consciousness returned. He woke up as if from a brief nap, completely unaware of what had transpired. And the first thing he did was something so human, so natural, that it makes this story even more powerful. He asked, "How long have I remained here?" Think about that question. It shows that Uzair had no sense of time passing. He thought he had been there for maybe an hour, maybe a day at most. His body gave him no signal that a century had passed. His hunger hadn't grown unbearable. His thirst hadn't driven him mad. He simply woke up, and the first thought was a simple, confused question about how long he had slept. And then comes the answer. The answer that comes to him, most scholars say, is from Allah himself, or through an angel, or through his own realization as he looks around. The response is shocking. "You have remained here for 100 years. 100 years. A complete century. Everything had changed. The world was different. The people were different. The very fabric of existence had transformed." But here's where it gets even more miraculous. Allah didn't leave Uzair confused or disoriented for long. The Quran tells us about a profound sign that was given to him. There was food that had been with him, food that by all laws of nature should have rotted and decayed over a century. Yet when Uzair looked at it, it was still fresh. It hadn't changed. The decay that should have consumed it never happened. This detail is crucial. Allah could have simply told Uzair that 100 years had passed, but instead Allah provided physical evidence, tangible proof, something Uzair could see with his own eyes and touch with his own hands. The food was the same as when he had fallen asleep, fresh, untouched by time. It was Allah's way of showing that while the world had aged, while centuries had transformed everything around him, the bubble in which Uzair existed had remained frozen. And then the real miracle, the answer to his original question. Uzair looked at his own body. He examined himself, and he realized something that must have filled him with overwhelming awe and realization. His body had not aged. Not a single wrinkle, not a single gray hair, not a single sign of 100 years. He was exactly as he had been before, perfectly preserved, untouched by time and decay and death. But the miracle didn't stop there, because the most incredible part was yet to come. The Quran described something so extraordinary that it shatters the boundaries of human understanding. Allah showed Uzair a donkey, and this donkey had also been dead for 100 years. And as Uzair watched in absolute astonishment, the Quran tells us that Allah brought the donkey back to life. Not gradually, not slowly, but in a way that Uzair could see it happening in real time. The Quran uses the phrase, "Look at the bones, how we raise them up and then we cover them with flesh." This is describing a resurrection happening right in front of Uzair's eyes. The skeleton of the donkey, which had been dead for a century, was being reconstructed. Bone by bone, the structure was being rebuilt. And then, layer by layer, flesh was covering those bones, muscles forming, skin covering the muscles. And then the final miracle, the spirit returning to the body, life returning. The donkey stood up alive and whole, resurrected before Uzair's very eyes.